As we think about and begin to discuss this place we call home, we want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Methow people. We invite you to read Lost Homeland by Richard Hart and to consider a donation to the Methow Valley Interpretive Center to honor the history and cultural traditions of the Methow people who have long been and continue to be stewards of this land we now call home. The Methow Valley is a land of immense beauty, extraordinary natural resources, and diverse landscapes. Here we enjoy clean water, clear air, abundant wildlife, and star-filled night skies. Outdoor recreation is a part of Valley culture, as are the arts. Music, theater, dance, and fine arts are as familiar as the abundance of mountain trails, rivers, and lakes where we recreate. And the people of the Methow Valley are as diverse as the landscape. Our valley is an extraordinary place to live, yet living here can be extremely difficult for many. In a healthy housing system, the vacancy rate for rentals is between 7 and 8%. The vacancy rate in the Methow Valley is now less than 1%. Additionally, over 50% of the Methow population is cost-burdened, meaning they spend more than 33% of their income on total housing cost. In just the past 5 years, the median home price in the Methow Valley has increased to $492,000. The full-time wage required to purchase a home at this price is about $53 an hour. With an economy heavily reliant on tourist dollars, many jobs are in the service industry and few pay more than $15 an hour. This means that over half of our community members do not have the means to purchase a home where they work. So how did we get here? In this presentation, we'll take a look at the history of housing and home ownership in the Methow Valley within the context of policies and practices dictated by the U.S. government. This is a history of displacement, disruption, reconciliation, and resilience, and one that includes our struggles towards a just and equitable society. The first human residents of the Methow Valley moved into the region about 10,000 years ago. These ancestors of the Methow people were generally nomadic, moving with the seasons, and established camps in various locations up and down the valley. Their traditional lands extended roughly from what is now Washington Pass down to the Columbia River. One of the first key legislative actions that impacted the history of displacement here in the Methow Valley and across the United States was the Homestead Act. Enacted during the Civil War in 1862, it provided that any adult citizen or intended citizen who had never borne arms against the U.S. government could claim 160 acres of surveyed government land. Claimants were required to improve the plot by building a dwelling and cultivating the land. The impact of this act cannot be overstated. More importantly, it illustrates the U.S. government's codification of land ownership as a means of building wealth. It also effectively excluded Native Americans as they were not given U.S. citizenship until 1924. Beginning with the Indian Appropriations Act of 1851 and 1871, Congress declared that indigenous tribes were no longer granted nation status and that all Indians were considered wards of the U.S. government. Many treaties concerning ancestral lands were effectively voided with this act, paving the way for white settlers to claim land under the Homestead Act and for the forced removal of indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands. The Colville Reservation was established in 1872, and the Moses Columbia Reservation in 1879. While the details of the removal of the Methow people are unclear, by 1883, the first inhabitants of the Methow Valley lost Aboriginal rights to their homeland, were moved to the Colville Reservation or to an allotment on the Moses-Columbia Reservation. By 1886, the Methow Valley was open to white settlers. The Dawes Act of 1887 authorized the federal government to break up tribal lands by partitioning them into individual plots. Only those Native Americans who accepted the individual allotments were allowed to become U.S. citizens. The objective of the Dawes Act was to assimilate Native Americans into mainstream U.S. society, thereby diminishing their cultural and social traditions. As a result of the Dawes Act, over 90 million acres of tribal land were stripped from Native Americans and sold to non-natives. By 1892, the Colville Reservation was reduced to about half, as white settlers moved into the region, demanding the best land for farming and ranching. The towns of Twisp and Winthrop were platted in 1899 and 1901, respectively. Primary industry included mining, farming and dairy, and logging. There is no census data on record that describes the makeup of the population, but in a letter penned by Winthrop pioneer Guy Waring in 1891, he wrote, "The population of the entire Methow Valley was not in excess of 150 souls." In the 1930s and 40s, New Deal legislation brought a number of changes to the housing industry as government officials tried to ease the devastating impacts of the Great Depression and World Wars I and II on American families. The National Housing Act of 1934 provided government-backed insurance on mortgage loans and established a 30-year term and low interest rates for mortgages. This made homeownership more accessible to many lower-income families. However, this legislation also established a clearly stated bias in favor of white families. The GI Bill, another of FDR's critical legislation, provided low-cost loans to World War II veterans, but blatantly excluded black soldiers from this benefit. This era saw the advent of increased exclusionary zoning, like urban redlining, that kept blacks from qualifying for home loans. Back in the Methow Valley, the population grew to about 840. With that growth came the final exodus of the Methow people, who were no longer welcome to hunt, fish, and gather on their ancestral lands. The relocation of the Wagner Lumber Company from the Okanagan Valley to Twisp in the 1940s was a boon to the economy. At its peak, the mill employed up to 400 people, with most jobs paying well above the average for that time. During the period of 1940 to 1950, the population of Twisp increased 63%. That was the largest 10-year increase on record. Then, in 1948, floods devastated most of the state of Washington, including the Methow Valley. All of the bridges crossing over the Methow River were washed away, making access to the valley difficult. Homes and businesses were destroyed, and 15 valley residents lost their lives. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, or sex. Despite the historic nature of the Fair Housing Act, in practice, housing remained segregated in many areas of the United States in the years that followed. From 1950 to 1980, the total black population in America's urban centers nearly tripled. During this same time period, white Americans steadily moved out of the cities into suburbs, taking many of the employment opportunities blacks needed into communities where they were not welcome to live. In response to the continued inequities in homeownership for black Americans, a group of Southern civil rights leaders traveled to Israel in 1968 and learned about the success of the Jewish National Fund, which had a long history of acquiring and then leasing land to planned communities and cooperatives. This group returned to develop the first community land trust in the United States. Called New Communities, the trust began with the acquisitions of 5,000 acres of agricultural land near Albany, Georgia in 1970. Today there are over 300 community land trusts across the country, all working to make home ownership a more equitable opportunity for a broader segment of the population. The Methow Housing Trust is based on that model. With the opening of the Cascade Highway in 1972, the potential for a shift to a tourism-based economy became a reality, and the westernization of Winthrop became an added attraction to the natural beauty of the region for visitors. The Wagner family brought more than mill jobs to the valley. In this same period of time, a group of investors proposed to develop land in Mazama to create a destination ski resort. This development was highly contested, and while it ultimately fell through, it placed the Methow Valley squarely on the map as a natural playground for Westsiders. The impact on the housing market was significant, as wealthy urbanites bought up land to build second homes. Between 1972 and 82, the tax assessment value of homes in the Methow Valley increased by more than 10 times. The development of the Nordic ski trails in the late 1970s by what is now known as Methow Trails brought even more attention to the valley's recreational opportunities and wilderness escape for city dwellers. The legacy of these events is profound. Today, approximately 50% of homes owned in the Upper Valley, Winthrop and Mazama, are recreational properties or second homes. After the opening of the highway, there was slow but steady growth in the Methow. During this time legislatively, restrictions on predatory lending and relaxation of consumer protection laws led to an influx of subprime mortgages. National rates of home ownership peaked at 69% in 2005. Yet as we now know, this bubble exploded in 2008, leading to the Great Recession and a record level of home foreclosures. Many of those affected were lower and middle-income families who were targeted by predatory lenders. In the Methow Valley, the impact of the subprime crisis can be seen in the drop in total real estate sales value starting in 2008. The value of total homes sold did not recover fully until 2016. In the Methow, the stock of available and affordable housing was already decreasing before the wildfires of 2014 and 2015. In the year 2000, 51% of homes sold for less than $150,000. By 2014, only 17% of the housing stock sold in that affordable price range. The wildfires saw a loss of almost 300 homes, many of which could not be rebuilt due to lack of insurance or inability to afford a rebuild. This also put additional pressure on the rental market, and rents began to increase. As a result of a comprehensive housing needs assessment, the Methow Housing Trust was born, with the mission to develop and preserve permanently affordable, quality housing for residents of the Methow Valley. To date, we have added 17 permanently affordable homes for residents of our community to purchase at a price point based on wage realities. Today, the COVID pandemic is causing another population boom. According to a recent Methow Valley News article, home prices are skyrocketing and rentals are becoming even more scarce. Many employers have embraced telecommuting. This has freed many people who were not able to move because of work to move their families here for a more idyllic way of life. It is too soon to know what effects this shift may have down the road, yet we see the workforce members of our tourism-based industry are being priced out of affordable housing. We learned that even with some existing families electing to homeschool, there are 40 new students enrolled in our school district. Builders and contractors are busier than ever. By 2021, the Methow Housing Trust will have built 21 permanently affordable homes for eligible Valley residents. By 2022, we have plans to expand the portfolio of affordable homes in our community to Winthrop. Affordable homeownership is one proven housing solution, and of course there are other solutions needed. While growth may be inevitable, and housing costs will rise and fall with the tides, We join the Methow community in a commitment to ensuring access to secure, affordable housing for all community members. If we all work together, the Methow will remain a place where all community members at all ages and income levels can live and work and thrive.